I want to talk about Shoto's quirk Awaken and why when he attains this, he will essentially be unbeatable. Contrary to many people's beliefs, Shoto is one of the strongest characters in the entire story of My Hero Academia, with his max power rivaling almost any character that is currently actively living in the entire story. But there's a few reasons why people view Shoto a notch behind some of the other more favorable characters. One reason is simply because Horikoshi does not go out of his way to put Shoto into many altercations, whereas his rival characters such as Deku and Bakugo has been in multiple fights with multiple prominent figures. And the second reason is Horikoshi brings a huge level of ambiguity when it comes to the power of pro-kinetic characters, making it real difficult to scale characters like Endeavor, Dabi, and Shoto. The one thing that we know for a fact about Shoto's quirk is that it was made to be unbeatable. Being that Endeavor was unable to surpass his limits due to his bodily regulations with his own pyrokinetic flame quirk, he sought to have a child that could avoid all of those limitations, which resulted in Endeavor marrying Ray, who turns out to be an ice user. The mindset behind this was obvious. If a person can have and train up both fire and ice, there would be no limits to how hot their fires can go and how low their ice could cool, giving the person who has that quirk essentially unlimited potential. However, there's a problem. Currently, in the story of My Hero Academia, Shoto is portrayed in the story to be one of the strongest students. And I would like to argue out of all students, he still has the most raw power than anyone. But the way that his quirk is set up, and also the way that he's been training to use his quirk, he can only attack with one move at a time. Whether it's the Heaven-Piercing Ice Wall, or the Wall of Flame, or the Flash Freeze Heat Wave, or any of the Flash Fire techniques, Shoto is able to use both quirks at the same time, but he has never shown the ability to attack with both his fire and ice simultaneously. And that was all true until Phosphor. Phosphor is a technique that allows Shoto to channel both halves of his quirk throughout his body. Using his heart as something like a generator to circulate the chilled and hot blood around his body, Shoto is able to merge both halves of his quirk into one single ability, literally allowing him to both freeze and burn his opponents. Now, with the Phosphor technique, this is the first time in the entire series where we can legitimately scale Shoto's power to above his own father. Even though the statement was never specifically said in the story of My Hero Academia, the utility of Phosphor during the Dabi versus Shoto fight is more than enough evidence to prove that Shoto's power is above his own father. With the power of this cold fire, Shoto is able to completely nullify and also overpower the hot flames of Dabi, which was stated by a quirk doctor and Endeavor that Dabi's flames were stronger than Endeavor's. So Shoto using attacks like Cold Flame Pale Blade and Great Glacial Aegir, which combines the powerful abilities of both his fire and his ice quirk together in one attack, is clearly one of the strongest characters in the entire story. Phosphor made Shoto so strong that Dabi decided to use the same technique and overpower Shoto. So in knowing that Shoto has progressed so much, but Dabi is still 1 foot ahead of him, there's nothing else for Shoto to really do besides awaken. And with Shoto's awakening, he would easily be one of the strongest characters in the entire story of My Hero Academia, far surpassing, in my opinion, Bakugo and rivaling the powers of Deku. But what would his quirk awakening be, and how would he be able to achieve it? There are many ways that you can spin the possibilities of Shoto receiving his quirk awakening, but I think Horikoshi already explained just how Shoto is going to awaken his quirk, and in fact, I think he explained it back in 2020. During the Endeavor Agency arc, Deku, Bakugo, and Shoto were appointed to Endeavor's Hero Agency, where they would learn from the #1 hero how to better improve their hero skills and, more importantly, how to best use their quirk in any scenario. During their first response training after meeting Endeavor, Deku, Bakugo, and Shoto all understood the importance of not making any type of excuses for not being where they're supposed to be on time, because lives are at stake. And after understanding that, Endeavor tells Bakugo and Shoto that they're going to have the same assignment to work on, which is build up and release and condense your power to unleash the max output for just a second, or focus your power. And this is where it becomes more important, because Endeavor then tells them to pick one or the other and drill it over and over and over until you don't need to think about it. And for Deku, his training is to parallel process his quirks, to use a single quirk to the point where you don't have to think about it, and then adding another quirk on top of that. Now what Horikoshi did by planting those seeds in the Endeavor Agency arc was essentially telling us how each character would awaken their quirk, and we see their training be established during their fight with Indy. And here is the point of emphasis. With the assignment that Endeavor gave to both Shoto and Bakugo, Bakugo went with the side of condense and release, and Shoto went with the side of focus at a point and build up. And the interesting thing about this is that all three characters, Deku, Bakugo, and Shoto, created techniques that fit those assignments. The technique that Deku used was things like full 100% Manchester Smash, which again is a product of parallel processing multiple quirks at one time. For Bakugo, that technique was cluster. Now interestingly about Bakugo, in My Hero Academia chapter 362, he awakened his quirk. And the explanation for how he was able to do that was as follows. Quirk explosion. The sweat glands on his palms produces a nitroglycerin-like sweat that can detonate. But the cluster upgrade he devised came with a side effect even he himself wasn't aware of. The act of saving up sweat into launchable beads put a terrible burden on the glands on his palm. With his sights set on victory, he kept storing those beads in the glands until they were forced to find other exits and leak out all over his body. And for Shoto, as we all know from me explaining in this video, his technique that was based off his assignment was phosphor. It's a technique in which he has to focus all of his energy on one single point, which is his heart, in which he builds up all the ice and the fire to one single point, which is his heart, and releases it all at once. So in using logic, if Endeavor put both Shoto and Bakugo in the same basic assessment, telling them to pick whichever one you want and just focus on that, and Bakugo's Quirk Awakening was basically him being able to use explosion coming out of any area of his body, then Shoto's Quirk Awakening would be the highest extent of his phosphor technique. A power in which instead of phosphor being just built up in his heart, it's built up throughout his entire body, and there would be no such thing as half cold, half hot anymore. There would just be ice, fire. Shoto's quirk would literally change to where anything he touches, no matter where it is on his body, he will be able to freeze and burn everything. And you want to know the scariest part about this awakening that Shoto would have? There would literally be no limit as to how much power he could emit in one go. It will almost be as if any power that you can emit with any quirk in the entire story, Shoto could likely match that power without too much time. Now, there has to be drawbacks, and I would think that the drawback would likely be something along the lines of fatigue. So he would likely get tired really quickly, but outside of fatigue, there would be nothing that would stop Shoto from being able to completely demolish any villain or any person that he would fight, including Shigaraki. And in my opinion, the only person that would have a chance of being stronger than Shoto would be Deku. Subscribe